So we're here today to talk about everything that GDS has taught me about building Canvas apps. A little bit about me before we start. So I'm Stuart Baxter, Microsoft MVP in the Biz Apps category. Just got re-awarded for the second time, alongside Keith Atherton, who got his on the same day and got his renewal on the same day. So well done, Keith. And of course, everyone else who got renewed. I'm also co-founder of Scottish Power Platform User Group. Myself, Charlie Phipps, Josh Gillis and Rani Calhoun lead Scottish Power Platform User Group. We meet kind of round about once a month, combination of virtual events and in-persons, usually in Glasgow or Edinburgh. And last but not least, I am Power Platform lead at DigPacks from last Monday. I know we have a few people from DigPacks today. I think Bill's joining us. For those who don't know much about DigPacks, we are a Microsoft Solutions partner specialising in Power Platform, and the main sector that we work in is healthcare, in particular the NHS. So if anyone is interested in learning more about DigPacks, do have a look on LinkedIn, have a look on our website and so on, and you'll get to learn more about what we do. You will see a lot of content from me on LinkedIn over the next few months around things we have planned as well. So, in terms of what I've learned from GDS, in terms of what's important, I've got 4 broad categories that I want to discuss, starting with styling. For anyone who's ever looked at a gov.uk website before, it always looks the same. There's always a black logo at the top. Sometimes it has slightly different colours depending on which government service you're on, but it's fairly simple. They've got a header font. They've got body font, headers are always the same size, body font's always the same size. The main content is always 2/3 of the width of the screen. Really quite simple stuff, not massively complicated at all. And moving on to the second point, it's always consistent. If you go to book your theory test, it's the same look and feel as if you go to renew your passport. It's really, really important when building apps to remain consistent and focus on usability. Keep it simple for the user. Never assume that they know what you know. Quite often with apps, people will use them once a month, once a quarter, sometimes even once a year. Our job as consultants is to make an app that's easy for them. The biggest compliment I've ever had in my career when demoing an app back was, "This looks really easy." When you get that compliment, you've done your job correctly, basically. Next part, components. To borrow an analogy from Craig White, we have dry, don't repeat yourself. You don't want to do that very often. Nobody wants to write the same block of code 4 or 5 times, build the same component over and over again. That would make you wet, writing everything twice. Our aim with components, stay dry, avoid getting wet. Modern theming that's now built into Canvas apps is a really good tool for maintaining styling. When we get onto our demo in a little bit, you can refer to the theme colors. You could even use lighter and darker versions, refer to the theme font, etc. And that keeps everything consistent, as we touched on in the last slide. There are a few limitations of components. For example, when trying to build an error component, which I'll show you later on, I ran into some difficulties in terms of creating links within there that set focus to parts of the app. The rough premise of that, you have an error block that says this is wrong, and that's wrong. When you click on that within the error block, it should set focus to that area of the app to allow you to correct whatever's wrong. Components don't allow set focus. In circumstances where that comes into play, use the new view code feature, which we'll demo in a little bit. That will give you some YAML. You can make some small changes to it, change the name of the control, for example, change the body text within it, paste it back in, and you have another control that looks and feels just like the last one with very minimal effort. That is one of the key parts I'm going to demo in a little bit. So for anyone who hasn't seen YAML and wondering what it is, we'll find out quite soon. And last but not least, patterns. So we've got a consistent style. We've created our components. you then want to combine them together into patterns. So an example of a pattern is always having a welcome screen and that always having similar information in it. On GDS, they call it how to use this service. That always goes at the start. At the end of a GDS process, you always get a green box that says, you've been successful, here's what happens next. That's another great example of a pattern. And that really helps the user to know what's going on. Within your patterns as well, you want to give feedback to users as often as required, whether that is as simple as the process is complete and someone will be in touch within 7 days on that last screen, or consistent error styling there to continue to give feedback to users that, for example, they're entering the date of birth in the wrong format. Using these patterns, we can make apps that feel familiar. Just like GDS, you go onto any Gov service, it looks the same. It feels familiar, and you're more likely to get that all-important compliment. This feels really easy. And that's my slides. As I said at the start of the call, I don't want to spend all day talking through slides. So I'm going to show you some of the things I've put together and how we can apply these to Canvas apps. So I'm going to start off by opening up a component library within Canvas apps and showing you some of the things we can put together. And we'll then link them back to GDS and show you where they came from and why they're useful. Just be a moment while we get things ready. Okay. So this is a really simple component called inset text. This is almost a carbon copy of the GDS styling. What this allows you to do is put examples of what you might put in, additional information about a page, and it really stands out. It's not just body text, it's clear that it's something important and it would draw your eye there. Another example here is our panel component. This would be used at the end of a process to say you have successfully submitted your holiday request, your line manager will approve within the next 7 days, and you don't have to do anything further, for example. And lastly, a date input control here. Really simple. What's the date today? Our example text here, and then input boxes here. And our output property from our component is a really simple date time. And we can, there's it gone now. We can set our date selected here. That's our output. And that's really simply just the year, the month, and the day converted to a date. Let's see some examples of how these might look. So we can insert a custom panel, for example. And a panel heading could be, thank you for your request. We can then take our width and make that a bit bigger. And this might be something you would expect on the final screen of a process, taking you through what you've got and why. And that's a quick rundown of applying some of these components to Canvas apps. As you can see, it was a few very quick properties there to put this together. Let's have a look at GDS itself and see some more examples of what you might see and why. What I do want to dive into is patterns in a moment as well. So we're going to start with styling. For anyone who's used gov.uk before, it always looks like this. Now, personally, I think this is quite a familiar feel. I'm not by any means saying you should copy this feel. What you should, however, do though is have a consistent styling across your apps so that when someone opens it, it feels familiar and they feel comfortable. When we get further down here, we have things like layout. It's really important here that we differentiate between small screens and large screens. So on small screens, Ideally, you want to start with a single column layout. No one wants to look at a mobile phone and see something this wide and have no idea what's on it. So it is quite important for our small screens that we treat them differently from our large screens. We will be touching on small screens and large screens throughout this. At a very high level, a small screen is a mobile, a large screen is a tablet, and upwards, basically. It's quite important when you're designing your apps that you do, as I say, consider them. We can use things like a horizontal container with the wrap property on, for example, to show it one under the other as opposed to side by side, depending on our width. Another really important thing that I don't see very often in Canvas apps is looking at spacing. Nobody wants to see all the controls all squashed together, but 5 points on a large screen versus 5 points on a small screen looks and feels really different. On your smaller screen as well, you've obviously got a lot less screen real estate. You don't necessarily want to have, for example, spacing unit 6 here. It's 20 points on small screens, 30 points on large screens. Now on a small screen where you've got 300 pixels, 30 pixels is 10% of your screen. You don't want to be using that for spacing. Moving on to our next area, typography. GDS obviously do recommend using their font. We wouldn't necessarily recommend doing so. Where it is quite useful though is here it recommends an alternative typeface like Helvetica or Arial. The main thing to take away from this is use the same small font set. Don't be using 15 different fonts in your apps. It's going to look horrible. It's going to confuse people. Going back towards the start, keep it simple. Pick one, maybe two fonts. Stick to them throughout your app. For type scale, really useful stuff that came out of this. For those who don't know, GDS have put a lot of research into what is human readable and what people perceive things to be based on their size. And they have different line heights and things here as well, line heights and font sizes. I would recommend taking these into account when building your apps. When we move back to our app demo in a moment, I'll show you a really nice way of putting this together and just referring back to that object over and over again. There's loads of stuff down the bottom about using CSS to do this, but that does involve adding packages and things, so we won't go into that. Another really important part within typography is headings. From a Canvas app perspective, it's really, really important that when something is a heading, you tell the app it's a heading. What that's going to allow is, from a screen reader perspective, your app's going to pick up it as a heading. When a screen reader reads the page, it's going to understand it as a heading, which for those who haven't used screen readers before is really important. Screen reader users often search for headings to navigate through areas. So really, really important we do mark that as a heading. It's really, really simple to do. I'm going to insert a text label, for example. Go into role, and we can change the text role from default, which is body text. And there's various different options here. Heading 1, heading 2, 3, 4, etc. Literally 3 or 4 clicks and you've made someone's life easier for the screen reader user. So it's quite important that we use these. When we build our components as well, within our component library, this is set to heading 1, so it's picked up effectively from a screen reader. Same again with our panel. This is heading 1, this is default, and this is default. You might wish to make that middle one heading 2, depending on what styling you have in place on your app. Paragraphs, there's not a lot of useful stuff in here, aside from the default paragraph being 19 points. That's for a regular screen size. You obviously want to go smaller or larger based on what you're building and what type of content you have there. Links, I'm not going to go into these, it's fairly standard stuff here. That's a rough overview of how they put together their styling, though, and some of the things you should consider when building your own style guide. I'm going to move on to components, and you see here there's lots of different components here. What I think is really useful as an opinion down the bottom on when you should use it, which is great. More importantly, when you shouldn't use it. And there's all sorts of research in here from GDS in terms of why people might like it, why they might not like it, why it doesn't work for accessibility, where people might struggle. And this is often a really good reference point when building apps. And there's a suggestion from a fellow developer or even a business user, or it would be great to put an accordion within an accordion, for example. It's really easy to refer back to this and say, look, yeah, I understand where you're coming from, but it makes it difficult for users to read. What about we do one of these instead? And quite often one of them will jump out and they'll be like, yeah, you make a good point. Actually, we don't want to make an inaccessible app. Let's try this, let's try that. It might even be easier as a consultant to suggest one of these, put together a quick proof of concept and say, look, I understand this was what you were asking for at first. Here's why we wouldn't do it, which we've discussed. Here's an example or two of other things we could do that might help split up the series of sections here. Which one would you like to go with? Over the next few months, I will be building up a set of components specific to our work stream. I do recommend doing something similar as well for your customer types. What that will then mean is you're not building something fresh. When something's suggested, you're going back to your component library and you're saying, oh, I don't recommend that for this, but what about this? Here's an example ready to go for you. No additional effort as a developer, no downtime for the customer waiting on you building something, and a really, really quick conversation that puts to bed the bad idea, but also suggests an alternative straight away. Really important when dealing with customers, particularly talking about accessibility, is never use the word no unless it's followed by but. Always, always, always suggest an alternative and explain why that alternative is more viable. GDS is great because you can refer back to that and say, look, research has been done, the evidence is this, therefore we shouldn't do it. Here's some alternatives. I've used this a few times as well for inspiration for components. So checkbox one's probably not great. As an example, because checkboxes are really easy to do. But little things like the hint text here, select all that apply. There's a key difference between pick one and pick as many as you need to. I really like that they make it really clear that you're selecting one or you're selecting all. When I move further down to radios, personally, I would add in at the bottom, please select one. And then on your checkboxes, please select all that apply, for example. Really simple error messages here. I really like this message because it's clear. What's also useful is the big red block shows you exactly which part is the problem. What you can also do is anchor a set focus on that part there if there's more than one field on there, and you can point them straight to that. If there's one error, you go down the error message route. If there's multiple errors, you go down the error summary route. And you would expect on the enter your full name that would be a box that says full name. You click on that, set focus, point them there. Set focus is a really, really powerful function within Power Apps, and it's very underrated, to be honest. For things like this, directing someone to the thing they've done wrong is vitally important, and it just makes everyone's life easier. Makes testing easier, and more importantly, makes accessibility that bit easier as well. If someone's tabbing through this section here and it says enter your full name using a screen reader, they don't want to be searching for a full name. They want to select it and type the full name in. Simple as that. And there's all sorts of components in here, I said as well, and lots of suggestions on when to use them. I now want to move on to patterns and look at some of the different things we have here. So I mentioned earlier on the check your service is suitable. This is a welcome page. It goes through, asks them a couple of questions, and then says you're eligible, go and do something, or you're not eligible, don't. So, for example, in the past, we built an app for reward and recognition. People could be rewarded between £100 and £250 based on what they were being rewarded for. When the checklist service is suitable, the initial question was, do you want to suggest an award of over £500? If they said yes, it directed them to a different app that's the annual reward app, where you could have unlimited, as opposed to them getting halfway through the process to the part that says, how much do you want to award? You spent 3 or 4 minutes there, you get to that screen, you put 500 in and it says, no, the maximum's £100. They've wasted a whole bunch of time. They then need to go back into this other app and do that whole lot. With this pattern here at the start, we've done a simple check. Are you asking for more than £100? Oh, you are. We'll stop you there, go and do something else. And this is a really useful pattern. I've used this with quite a bit of success on more complex apps in the past. I do recommend reading up on this when you've got a moment. Another really useful one for complex apps is the check answers process. So this effectively gives a summary of the answers on a complex form or series of screens and allows people to view them and, more importantly, change and navigate back to that. What this does rely on is gathering the information across the multiple pages into an object, storing that object, presenting it here, and then submit form, I suppose, would be right at the end when it passes that object in and patches it to the database. So it's a little bit more effort initially, but the benefits that come with this completely outweigh that. If you're on a 15-page form, for example, the last thing users need is having to go back to the start of that form or cancel a request and resubmit it, or any of these complicated things. So if you are going down complex forms routes with multiple pages, I do recommend something like check answers. Another similar one here, complete multiple tasks. Little example, you've got a holiday booking system where you submit a holiday. Before you submit a holiday, you've got to, or let's use expenses, for example. You could create an expense trip, you could create individual expenses within it, and you could upload your receipts. And this would show the progress through this. And down the bottom here, your apply would be your submit button that would pass it all off to the approver to go ahead and say yes, for example. And again, it's a really good way of breaking up quite complex tasks and demonstrating progress to a user there. I really like this pattern as well, because the complete and incomplete part gives the user an idea of how much time they're going to have to spend on this. And more often than not, users have other things to do. They could, for example, go through check eligibility, complete that, knowing they've got a meeting at 4:30. It's 16:27 now, 3 minutes time. They're not going to have time to read the declaration. Okay, I'll leave it and I'll come back to it later on. I'll go back to that section, I'll read it and I'll submit it later on. I won't have to start again. As you can see from here, there's some quite clear patterns that have been put together. My recommendation when you start a new project is put something similar to this together for yourself. Look at the patterns you're going to use and why you might reuse them. Get them all documented, pop them in something like an Azure DevOps wiki, for example, and you can then reuse those same patterns on future projects. And what you end up with is a library of components you can reuse, some consistent styling that you refer back to using those components, and your patterns, which is your multiple components put together, alongside something to say this is when we would use it, this is when we wouldn't. And you end up with a really, really quick way of putting together proof of concept apps initially, but these could well end up as production services. And that is everything GDS has taught me about building Canvas apps. From what you've heard so far, I do want to make this quite an interactive session. Is there anything in particular you've seen so far that you want me to demo within Canvas apps? Or shall I go ahead and just show you a few different bits and pieces? No. Cool. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and just share the window so I can see the chat alongside. I'll just be one moment. So we have our component library here that I touched on earlier on. We're not going to go too deep into this. what I do want to show you is how we can use JSON objects to put together really simple styling and refer back to that later on. You could do this in components or you could do it directly within your app. Let's do something like this. We'll call an app GDS styling. We'll leverage modern components and we'll put together our styling in here as well and reuse bits of modern components to give something really reusable here. So we're going to start off, I don't like blank screens, but we'll start off with a header and a footer, for example. We can delete this. And we can insert. Before we do insert, we can switch on modern controls. And we can go in here and we can insert a header, for example. And that's going to give that same consistent blue throughout our app. We might want to put a logo on here, we might not. I'm going to switch off. This screen's called screen 2. We're not going to call it screen 2, we're going to rename it. Very, very important, we want to give it a plain English name. The reason for that is the screen reader is going to read this. And you can see that as well, it's also displayed on your header as well. So maybe give it a more meaningful name when you're building your own apps, but that'll give you a rough idea. What we then want to do is we can insert, let's put some text in here and put some words in here. And we're going to go back to consistent styling for a moment. Let's imagine our app has a cancel button and an OK button. We might hear a little noisy guest in the background. Really simple styling on here. They're both the same. There's nothing to draw your eye at. This one is OK and this one is cancel. We can make a really simple tweak to this, set it to secondary. Just like that, it's clear this one is OK, it draws your eye to the blue, the cancel one's not. We would maybe use set focus if this was a confirmation screen to set focus on that OK button. Really, really simple tweak. If we maintain that consistency though, and always have our OK buttons blue or our positive buttons blue, and always have our cancel buttons as white, when people see two buttons next to each other, their eyes drawn straight to the blue one. That's always OK, it's always on the right. Really, really simple thing to do there. And what we can also do if you want to get more complex, let's say you're not using modern controls, we can insert a label, for example. For whatever reason, we can't use modern controls, we need some additional properties that aren't there yet. We could go into our font. And we could apps.theme. .font. And we then, with the same font here, we can look at font size and things. So yeah, that's modern controls referring to your app theme. Something else I quite like to do as well is let's say we've got some warning text or say an error message component. We don't want it to be blue, we want it to be red. We want to have a highly accessible red. We don't want to be hard coding red in every time.
Sorry, Stuart, are you meant to be sharing your screen?
As it stops sharing.
Is that all right? Thank you. Cheers.
So we've got some warning text. Let's say we're building an error block, for example, and we want that to be coming through as red because it's an error. That's consistent styling. We could take this and we could find our color over here and select that, and we can do, for example, that's not how you spell theme. Don't let me down, Canvas apps. Let's go purple instead because it's not liking this for now. It's not recognizing red theme. We could do our apps theme.colors. Primary, for example. Earlier on today, this was working with the red theme. You can also refer to custom themes here as well. So if you have a slightly different styling from the red theme or the green theme, you can go in there and you can refer back to them. Really, really important if you are maintaining that consistent styling, use highly accessible colors. These colors here are highly accessible. And it is worth checking color contrast and things like that. Andrew Smalley does a fantastic session on accessibility. I'd recommend reading up on that if you do have a chance, and he would take you through some useful stuff there. And that's basically everything I wanted to show today. As you can see, it's easy to do in Canvas apps. You just need to put that little bit of effort in up front and refer back to the things that are there. Do the research and understand that red theme.colors.primary will give you a highly accessible red. Don't go hard coding in color codes and reusing them all over the place. We could even go a little bit more simple than that, and we could use our app formulas, for example. So we could do, for example, get a color equals. Not sure why it's not recognizing the red theme, but recognizing others, that's new. We could do something like that, for example. Something like that. Referring back to an error color, obviously bad practice, not clearly differentiating that that's a named formula. You would do something like NF underscore error color, camel case, etc. But just to give you an idea of how you might do this. In the past as well, which I covered in my last session, you can also build up complex objects within here with things like your spacing, your header font, your header 2 font, and your font sizes. Maybe even put some conditionality in there around the screen size for your spacing, if it's a large screen versus small screen. All sorts of different things you can do with app formulas in terms of building up complex JSON objects. What I have also done in the past to take this a little bit further is built that JSON object up in app formulas, cut it out of there, paste it into a JSON environment variable, and then bring it back in from that variable. And you can then use that on multiple projects. So in the past, I have worked with various different government organizations who use a variation of GDS, but a slightly different header color, for example, or a slightly different theme color. Using that approach did mean that we could effectively go in, change the base color to transport blue versus maritime dark blue, for example. Put that in as the environment variable and deploy the same solution in multiple places. So the key takeaway I want to have from today, GDS has all sorts of useful examples in terms of why you should and shouldn't do things. And the key focus on GDS is reusability. Our key focus as Power Platform consultants should be to build solutions as quickly as possible for our customers, reduces their costs, keeps you off projects for 12 to 18 months, and gives the customer what they need in a much quicker time. As a result, you take on more projects, you make more money, and your boss is happy. And that's our key takeaway today. And that's everything I wanted to cover. Does anyone have any questions today? Thank you, James. I am going to pick on a couple of people on the call. Oh, Adam's got a question, actually. Go ahead, Adam.
Hey, yeah, it was a great Stuart, thank you. It was just, you mentioned a couple of times using set focus. That's not really something that I've used myself. Could you go into a bit more detail on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to share again. So it's really simple. So let's say, that's not going to be that simple. So let's say we have, just going to clear some of these out for now. So we'll create a button. And we'll call this focus on name control, for example. You'd want to put something a bit more complex than this in, but just to demonstrate this, we've got a button here in our on select. We're going to need one more thing actually. We'll do a text input. Again, terrible practice with naming on there, but just for demonstration purposes. In our on select here, we can do set focus. My input. What I'm also going to do is create some more text inputs just to demonstrate how this works. So I've got 3 text inputs here, obviously no spacing, which isn't great. So I'm focused on this one here, not the text input 1. When I click on here, that should set my focus to here. It's not behaving properly with modern controls at the moment, but what that would do is effectively set that as the focused control and allow you to start typing in there, for example. Just want to test something. Nah, it's not working with modern controls at the moment, which is a bit annoying. It has been up and down with the modern controls, but what it should have done was took us back to here, basically. You can use that for any kind of input control, whether it's a text input, a date input, anything really. It's really quite useful. But modern controls, it's not working. Quick caveat though, modern controls are in preview at the moment, so not everything works all of the time.
Yeah, I can imagine how that would be useful on something I'm developing at the minute, actually, where there's a few different inputs and just pressing a button that would take you directly to the one that people are after changing. Yeah, that would be quite useful. So I'll have a look at that. Thank you.
I find it really useful on, if we go components and where is it? Error summary. So if I built something like this, when you click on enter your full name, behind that I would have a set focus that would take you to the full name box, for example. Or the date your passport was issued must be in the past, take you to the passport issue date, for example. Really powerful piece of functionality. As I said earlier on, it's not heavily used, but it's really great for accessibility and usability. Once you are building that for the project you're on now, just give me a shout if you have any difficulties at all. I'll be happy to jump on a call for 10-15 minutes and give you a wee hand.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Cheers.
Perfect. Salty, go ahead, Matt.
Hello, Stuart. Thanks a lot for that demonstration. It was brilliant. Relatively new to Power Apps, and I've seen the concept of components, and thanks for sharing that. Really looking forward to diving into that. Where do you stand on templates? Because before I kind of started looking at components, I was actually going down the road of templates. So instead of creating different screens and kind of repurposing those screens, and I suppose they had objects on them. So now I'm at a point where I'm thinking, right, is it better, more cost effective of my time to go down the component route, or how does templates come into that? If you know what I mean?
Both have their place. So I'm going to pick on someone who's on this call actually, whose name is spotted. Madeline, who I worked with before in a previous job. We worked together on an app that followed GDS principles, and often on that last page it would have your confirmation, the green box that says thank you for submitting. Depending on what you'd done in the journey, it might say different things. So we had that screen as a template, and we used components to build the things on that screen. What that allowed us is those components were in a library. So the next app that we built, we could refer back to them and have that green box, no problem at all, consistent styling with all the other apps. So I suppose the short answer is both have their place and both can and should be used together to establish those patterns that I spoke about earlier. Recommend both, not one or the other.
All right, cheers. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you. James, go ahead, Matt.
In a vaguely similar question, we've got the ability to mess about with YAML and do all those kind of things. Have you tried playing around with that in terms of templating? So you've got a YAML script of how you want your Power App to look and how you want all these different sort of interactions to work. Have you tried playing around with that yet, or in terms of templates?
I'm not going to share this because it's an app that we're working on at the moment, but I'll take you through roughly what's involved.
Yep.
So we've got an app with 3 different types of details about a person. I appreciate that's very, very vague, but obviously customer confidential at the moment. 2 of my bosses are on this call as well, so I'm not going to go into any detail. Not that I would if they weren't here, Bill and Sanjay, but moving swiftly on. So yeah, some different types of details about a customer. And those are displayed in galleries. The way I like to do galleries that are replicating tables is have the same heading at the top, the same gallery styling, the same template fill, etc. So what I did was put together a gallery with a heading with 1 column and used YAML to set all my styling.
Yep.
Left that on a screen that I didn't use, and each time I built a gallery that has some sort of customer details in it, I would go in, copy my YAML, paste it, add a few properties in, stick it back in the app. That took the development time for 3 galleries down from probably a couple of hours, I would say, down to about 10 minutes. So it really is quite powerful. One thing I did find that's vaguely frustrating but made sense, if you've got a control on that, in that app with a name, let's say you copy it out, you forget to change the control name, you try and paste it back in, it will give you an error, but the error means absolutely nothing. It's not a plain English error at this stage. Again, I should caveat, it is in public preview at the moment. Not everything's perfect, but it was both a positive and a negative. Great it didn't do something silly like put a 1 on the end of it, but the error message was nothing short of gibberish. It didn't say anything like, you've got a control with this name. It said no, basically. But yeah, certainly really quite powerful. You could even combine them with patterns and components to give you your really reusable apps. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
No worries. And Steve M, how can I help, Matt?
Hi, yeah, it was really interesting. Thank you. I was just asking about the components you demonstrated. Do you know if they're only for Canvas apps, or can you use them in model-driven apps or even Power Pages?
And those particular ones that I demonstrated there were just for Canvas apps. I have in the past worked on a project for gov.uk that you can build them on Power Pages and model-driven apps. So the ones I put together there were just very quick ones for today, but it is certainly possible and quite easy to do. I will say I couldn't tell you exactly how to do it on Power Pages. At the time, we had much better developers than me working on that side of things, but it is possible. Particularly Power Pages, you can also refer to the different scripts and things that they have available on the GDS website to borrow their styling. There is a section on the GDS website that mentions how you can use GDS styling for non-government services. I'll just find that quick. It did hide away a wee bit. I think it might be in here, actually.
That was going to be a question, Stuart, I had. Anybody can access these guidelines, can they?
Yeah, public facing, anyone can access them. And there is a section, I can't remember where it is if I'm honest with you. There is a section in there though that I think it might be in their GitHub that tells you what you can do to their styling to make it generic, basically. There's a lot of the generic things like these components at the top. Like, let's be honest, this is not government property. We've all seen a tab list before. They make all those kind of things accessible as well, and it's completely open source. So you can go onto their GitHub and borrow the code and tweak it yourself if you had to as well. And I do strongly recommend referring to that GitHub and getting some inspiration for different things as well.
a good place to get started, isn't it? If you're just about to start kind of looking into this sort of thing, if there's something that's proven out there.
Where I find it really useful, I've come across this a few times in my career. You will find customers and users who are very firm on, this is why we've always done it this way, so we are right. Sometimes that is the case. Sometimes there's been research into it and they are right, and that's the background behind it. Sometimes they're not. So a little example, we had a customer who always used light grey text against white. It's not accessible. It's difficult to read. In low light, you can't make it out. Being able to refer back to something like this and say, look, here's the accessibility standards that the UK government follows and why they wouldn't use that light grey. They do, however, use a similar colour that's a bit darker. Let's go down that road instead. And it's not so much me versus you, it's the wider community contributing to usability, basically. And I do really like having backup when I give an opinion on something. And this does give some really great backup for following accessibility standards and how to adhere to them.
Just as an additional backup as well, the BBC also have quite a good GitHub page on this sort of thing as well, where they just list through everything that they've got. And the Financial Times also do everything for their graphics as well.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Have you got links for those by any chance that we could share with them?
I'll certainly try and find them for you. Yes, that's fine. One sec.
Even if you send them to me later, or people could reach out directly, that would be really useful.
5 minutes left. Any questions from anyone on the call? No. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for coming along. If you do have any questions, I'm just going to flash my last slide up, and that's got my LinkedIn and things on it. Any questions whatsoever come up, give me a shout anytime on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to help with anything you've got. Obviously, do maintain customer confidentiality, but quick 5-minute questions, or how do I do this, how do I do that, drop me a message anytime. More than happy to help. Apart from that, have a great afternoon, everyone, and speak soon.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart.
Useful as ever.
Thanks very much, Stuart.
Thanks very much, folks.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.